Testing 1 2, testing 1 2. Hear me? Cool. There I go already. All right. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thanks for being here today. We are going to get started with our day 2 of BenCon. So I just want to give everyone a huge welcome to day 2. We made it through day 1 yesterday. This is the Digital Benefits Network's first ever convening. And today we are hybrid. So yesterday we had around 90 to 100 people join us in person, but today we have over 400 people RSVP'd, watching us and hopefully joining us on live stream this morning. So I just wanted to say hello to everyone in person and in our virtual space. So thanks for being here. A lot of you in the room know who I am, but for our live stream audience, I will introduce myself. I am Chanel Robertson, the community manager of the Digital Benefits Network here at Georgetown University's Beck Center for Social Impacts and Innovation. Today's morning session, in my opinion, will be awesome, and not just because I helped plan the conference, but we have some really great speakers joining us today. Today we'll be joined by individuals representing different viewpoints and experiences across all levels of government, including nonprofits, academia, industry folks. And so I'm really excited because those people are folks who work on policy, delivery, and advocacy for public benefits and relevant technologies. So after I go over some housekeeping, you'll have the opportunity to hear from the Beck Center's Executive Director, Lynn Overman. And then the following panel is Equitable Tech in Horizons and Digital Benefits, and that'll be moderated by the Digital Benefits Network Senior Fellow Ariel Kinnan. And then following that, we'll have a round of lightning talks and our close out with Jen Palka, who will be debuting her new book, Recoding America, which you all should have gotten in your swag bags yesterday if you were here with us in person. So let me go. I always forget to really introduce myself on the right slide. So we're gonna go on over to our land acknowledgement. We did this yesterday, but I also like to take a moment again today to recognize Georgetown's history and future by sharing a part of Georgetown's land acknowledgement. Georgetown University recognizes that the land we currently occupy was and still is the homeland of the Nakatonk and their descendants, the Piscataway Conoy people. We offer our gratitude for the land and her people as we learn, teach, work, and commune. We are committed to supporting the Indigenous members of our community as we educate ourselves continuously on Indigenous histories, cultures, and issues. Thank you. All right, so we also went over this yesterday, but I do want to reiterate our code of conduct. This slide. The Digital Benefits Network is dedicated to providing a harassment-free environment and experience for everyone, regardless of race, gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, disability, physical appearance, body size, race, age, religion, or political affiliation. We do not tolerate any harassment or of participants in any form. And as a reminder, the Beck Center does reserve the right to determine what constitutes unacceptable behavior, and it will not be tolerated at Beck-sponsored events. If you are being harassed or notice that anyone is, please, or have any other concerns, please just email us at bencon@georgetown.edu or at digitalbenefits@georgetown.edu, or you can just come let me or a member of our staff know. All right. Let me here. For our community norms today, this morning session will be recorded and live streamed. For our virtual folks joining us, the chat and comments have been disabled. But if you have anything you'd like to share, any questions, please email them to bencon@georgetown.edu. And for our general norms, as always, please be kind and respectful. We also ask that you be reflective and mindful and be open and honest. Also take the best, leave the rest. Be present and please minimize use of devices. But if you do need to step away or take a phone call, you can always step outside and rejoin us afterwards. A note on this session today, once you entered the room, you should have received a couple of big index cards or note cards. Those are for our Q&A session. So we will have a lightning panel. We'll have our panel talk right after our introductions, and then you all will have the opportunity to ask questions. We are asking that you write your questions on that note card. You can write multiple questions on the card. We'll have some of our runners in the audience come grab them from you. So if you have a question, just raise your note card in the air and someone will come grab it and bring it down to our moderators. And lastly, if you haven't yet located the restrooms and water fountain, if you go out of Laura Fink Auditorium to your right and then make a left down the hallway, you'll see the vestibule with the restrooms and the water fountain. Cool. All right, let me take a moment to again introduce our fabulous Digital Benefits Network team. We are led by our bold and fearless senior fellow, Ariel Kennan. We are also joined by our spirited and gutsy researcher, Elizabeth Bynum-Sorrell, along with our two student analysts, Jason Yee and Oriel Gomez. All right. I don't want to keep you all waiting for the content any longer, so it is my pleasure and a great honor to introduce the Beck Center's Executive Director, Lynn Overman, for some opening remarks. So let's give her a round of applause.
Thank you so much. And I would like to actually ask you to give Chanel a round of applause, because I do not know how she has this energy level after all of the work she and the team have put in yesterday and today and moving forward. So it is an unbelievable joy to be able to work here. And I think I just messed up the screen, so I apologize. So good morning to everyone. My name is Lynn Overman, and I recently joined the Beck Center as the Executive Director earlier this year. I wanted to share with you a little bit about the Beck Center itself and a little bit about my background and why I think the work that you all in this room and the people online are doing is so important. So the Beck Center is a nonprofit institution that's philanthropically funded, that's based here at Georgetown. And we're really focused on finding ways to help governments better serve people using the tools of data, design, and technology. There are many reasons why I'm excited to lead the Beck Center, not the least of which is this amazing team that I get to work with and the students that we get to work with every day. But I did want to share with you a little bit of the background and why it is that I came to this space in particular. So I started my career actually as a public defender in Miami. And one of the first things that I learned was that not only were my clients grappling with the reality that they may be facing multiple years in prison, they were also grappling with other government services that were intended to provide them with stability and were not. So I will never forget, I had a juvenile client who received Social Security checks because his father had died in prison and he was the recipient of those checks. But every time my juvenile client was booked into a juvenile detention facility, those checks stopped. And I learned that the Social Security Administration was very good about stopping the checks and not as good at starting them up again. And so I would end up on the phone with Social Security trying to get those checks restarted because so much of Dell's family depended on that money. I remember calling multiple local public housing authorities to try to help my clients when I had a juvenile client who had one drug conviction, which would put the entire family at risk of eviction. But I will say the thing that struck me the most, and anyone who's ever worked in the criminal justice system or who knows public defenders, you end up being the family lawyer for a lot of your clients because they need a lot of help beyond just being defended from the charges that they're facing. But I'll never forget, I had one adult client say to me, "You're the first person from the government who's ever tried to help me." And I have to say that stopped me in my tracks because I thought, how many missed opportunities have there been for this person to get help before they got to this point? And that is really why the rest of my career, I did spend a lot more time working on trying to reform the criminal justice system. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done there. But I really pivoted a lot in the direction of let's help folks get the services that they need to have the stability and opportunity to have productive and fruitful lives. And that is why what you all are doing here today is so important, because if you can provide access to the benefits seamlessly, easily, so it's just something that folks can do and then they don't have to worry about, I think a lot of our low income vulnerable populations will end up with a lot more opportunity than they have right now. And what better work could there possibly be? But before I turn this over to the DBN team and we get to the amazing panelists that we have today, I do want to touch a little bit more on some of the other work that we're doing here at the Beck Center. I want to start with our digital service network, which may be rebranding soon, so keep an eye out for that. Just focus on helping governments build internal teams of digital service experts to increase government capacity to deliver on leadership policy and implementation priorities. So one thing that you're going to be hearing from Jen Paulka later today is that word implementation. It is not enough to have the funding. It is not enough to have the digital tools. You need the people in government who can actually help get these things done. And that is a critical piece of the puzzle. And I will say one of the most, I think, fun things that we did recently was the Digital Services Network helped the new governor of Pennsylvania stand up their new digital services team called Code PA. And I do want to give a shout out to Pennsylvania because that is an excellent acronym. Big fan of good acronyms, and that's a pretty solid one. And for folks who are interested in our digital services network, our senior fellow Kirsten is here today, and I encourage you to talk to her. Our Data Labs project is working with multiple states, and I believe several states are here that may be working with us on this program, provides in-depth support to help multidisciplinary state teams leverage data to inform policymaking and measure outcomes. And I will say last year, a state that participated in our cohort, Colorado, as a result of their participation in our program, were able to advocate with their state legislature and got $250 million investment in data infrastructure to help address their housing and homelessness problem. So the ROI on that program is a little insane, and we're encouraging many states to help to join us on that. I also want to give a shout out to our Intergovernmental Software Collaborative, and our fellow Dom Campbell's here. I have to share a little bit of an inside joke. Dom, when he first started, accidentally called it the Intergalactic Software Collaborative. So that is now the informal and now very public name that we kind of call it in the house. But it's really focused on helping governments acquire and deploy effective technology, providing a user-friendly experience with reasonable timeframes and reasonable budgets. And anyone who has been in government knows those last two things are often the hardest part. And then, of course, last but not least, our digital benefits network, which works to improve the equitable delivery of public benefits through the use of modern, seamless, and accessible digital services. And now it is my sincere pleasure to introduce you to the incomparable Ariel Kennan. I always joke when people introduce me as the leader of the Beck Center that I'm actually just here to work for Ariel. And I have no regrets about that. It is a wonderful job to work with Ariel. So thank you so much. And Ariel.
Good morning, everybody. It is so wonderful to see you all back here with us in person. For you, those of you who were with us yesterday. There's also a lot of wonderful Georgetown students joining us in the audience today. And thank you all for waking up early in the middle of the summer to come and join us. And last but not least, our online audience. There's been tremendous interest in this content, and we're so excited to share it with you all today. So I'd love to share a little bit about the Digital Benefits Network and some of the work we've been doing over the past year. As Lynn mentioned, we're part of the Beck Center here at Georgetown, and we convene practitioners both who work inside government, but also alongside really every level of government to spark dialogue, share new resources, with our end goal of supporting better digital delivery of public benefits and services. So we really believe when we have the right tools and resources and people in place, we can actually deliver a human-centered digital service for our public benefits. Uniquely, we work across programs, so we're focused on nutrition in SNAP and WIC, healthcare in Medicaid and CHIP, cash in a few different formats, including TANF, also called cash assistance, basic income, unemployment insurance, and last but not least, childcare. We do deep listening in all of these spaces and are really thinking about challenges that underpin these programs. There's so many lessons to learn that aren't always being shared across those silos, and we really see ourselves as one of the real honest brokers in the space to help make those connections and also share that information with other practitioners. So we're very focused on some of our current challenges in human-centered delivery. There's so many things that we can be doing so much better here and now, but the Digital Benefits Network is also really taking a look to the horizon to see what's coming with new technologies and methods for service delivery, and how can we make sure that we're evaluating those with a lens of ethics and equity as we decide to make new services available. We work in a few different ways at the network. We host events. We have a series of communities of practice. We have research that we publish and collect. And then we also have our own tools for the ecosystem where we share our own work, but also the work of many other organizations. You can read more about the network at digitalbenefitsnetwork.org. And there's information there on how to get in touch with us as well. So over the past year, we have started both some bigger convenings. We started almost a year ago this month with Rules as Code Demo Day, where we heard 8 great demos from projects in the US and internationally, sharing how they're using a Rules as Code approach to take policy into software. We have launched our quarterly call series. We had our first one back in December, which was focused on what's next in digital identity. And then we had one earlier this kind of end of winter on increasing security and equity in EBT. And back in April, we hosted a great event with the US Department of Labor with our Office of UI Modernization, as well as the state of Illinois to share how they are deploying ARPA dollars and getting money into states to support modernization. We also have published quite a bit of new research this spring. So the first of which was our digital authentication and identity proofing in public benefits. This is a data set that looks at how digital identity, both authentication and proofing, is being used in all 53 states and territories across the core programs of the safety net. The data is all open, reusable, accessible. Please look at it. Please review it. We would love your feedback on it, and also would love new analysis with that data we're really excited about. We're really grateful to our partners at Code for America who have helped us and shared data with us behind the scenes for that work, as well as our friends at American Inequality who have helped support the data visualization behind that research. We also earlier in the spring published a guide to federal actions on digital identity, which takes into account things that are happening in Congress and in agencies and in the executive branch to help have more of a structural policies and supports and pilots around digital identity. Things that happen a little bit in silos sometimes in government, but should be much more integrated in how they're communicated with each other. And just last week, we published our newest paper on Rules as Code, where we explore how policy is currently communicated by federal and state governments. We're looking at specifically at SNAP rules in this report, and then how those rules are used currently in some open source projects, and then also how they might be able to be extended through existing standards and frameworks. This research has been a partnership over the past many months with our Georgetown colleagues at the Massive Data Institute, and we're so grateful we have many MDI folks with us today. As I mentioned, we obviously publish our own research, but we care a lot about putting the work across the ecosystem that should be lifted up and in the hands of a lot more people in the field doing the work. And so we collect that on the Digital Benefits Hub. It's a fully also open source data set and library of all of the resources, case studies, and implementation examples. And all of it is available fully for free, fully publicly accessible and open. That project is a partnership with our colleagues at the American Public Human Services Association, or APHSA. Please check it out, and we also crowdsource submissions from it, so we would always love to get new things from all of you. And we also put out monthly and quarterly newsletters. Our monthly newsletter follows kind of a wider view at digital service delivery and the wider ecosystem for benefits. And then quarterly, our UI Tech Coalition puts out a roundup of all of the news happening at federal, state, and community levels with unemployment insurance. You can follow the link to subscribe, and also please feel free to follow us both on Twitter and LinkedIn. Last but not least, I just wanted to take a moment to thank our funders. They have supported us in the very early visions for the network and our research that we have been doing for several years now here at the Beck Center. So we're so grateful to the Ballmer Group, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the Families and Workers Fund, who support so many of us who do this work across the field and have been here with us at BenCon too. So thank you so much. All right. Last but not least, really nice. Let's go ahead and move into our panel. So it is my pleasure to start welcoming our panel to the stage. First with Amy Ashita, who's the Director of Technology Transformation at Technology Transformation Services Public Benefit Studio, part of the General Services Administration. Rachel Carson, who's a design lead at Sevilla. Jordan Burris, who's the Vice President and Head of Public Sector Strategy at Secure. And Elizabeth Laird, Director of Equity and Civic Technology, Center for Democracy and Technology. You can read more about all of our speakers at betcenter.org/BenCon bios or scan the QR code. As a reminder, you all have note cards, so have those at the ready as you have questions coming to mind, and we'll be reminding and starting to collect them about midway through. So we invited this amazing panel to join us really because you all represent a diversity of perspectives and experiences both inside and alongside government. Some of you are former and current public servants. And we think that you all are doing truly transformative work to ensure equitable and ethical access to benefits. So let's go ahead and start with our first question for all of you. Could you each share from your perspective what's unique about digital benefits delivery right now?
Sure, I'll start. So one of the things that's really exciting right now has been building over the last couple of years, really got kickstarted and jump-started by the Customer Experience Executive Order out of the President's office. So one of the many things that kickstarted was a focus across the federal government on how can we orient our services around the experiences that the American public experiences in day-to-day life. And instead of focusing on how our org charts operate, we can actually start by looking at a few different life experiences. So my team at the Technology Transformation Services has been supporting a couple of different life experiences, one around facing financial shock and the other around the experiences of families with children 0 to 5. And so this has looked like a lot of interagency collaboration and a shift in thinking about, okay, what are families experiencing and how can we orient our services? How can we coordinate with different levels of government at the state level, the local level, the county level, and really make sure that we are meeting families where they are at, that they are getting the information that they need at the right time, and that we are really orienting around them. So I'm really excited about that work. And of course, I would be remiss right now to not acknowledge that we are in the midst of public health emergency unwinding, which is presenting both a very unfortunate hundreds of thousands of people are at risk and currently losing their benefits, many due to administrative burden. So that is one of the other things that we are trying to be very thoughtful about and mindful as we look to both understand and capture administrative burden and move toward removing the barriers that cause people to lose benefits that they would otherwise be eligible for. So those are some things that are very unique about this moment. There's a lot of collaboration, a lot of need for us to respond and make sure that we are both taking care of people and that we are incorporating the lessons that we learned from the pandemic.
Thank you, Rachel.
Great. Yeah, I think something that's really exciting we're seeing from a state perspective, as Sevilla is a nonprofit design studio who partners with state agencies in Michigan. And we're seeing that there's just really been great advancements in access to digital benefits over the last 5 years. That was highly accelerated by the COVID pandemic. And we're seeing that state agencies immediately now understand the value of having easy access to benefits, applying, renewing, et cetera, online, and that they can no longer rely on folks coming into the office. And so opposed to years ago where that was some tension there, I think there's more and more awareness that we need to make access to benefits very easily accessible online. And there's a real bell curve across the US in terms of how folks in different agencies are approaching this. But we've seen in Michigan, they were really prepared for the COVID pandemic because they had done a lot of upfront investment in the full enrollment process being accessible online when folks were desperately in need during COVID. So yeah, I think that's a really exciting advancement, is to see that people and agencies are really focused on increasing that access now.
Yeah, and so from our perspective, at Secure, we're interested in seeing all the conversation and dialogue that's currently taking place as it relates to digital identity and really fraud prevention broadly. And, it's been highlighted that the pandemic did things to accelerate the way in which we thought about digital service delivery in particular. As an organization, we believe that everyone, regardless of race, age, gender, socioeconomic status, should be able to access digital services seamlessly and without friction. And as such, it must be intersectional and being able to work for all of them. The interesting part for us today is as organizations have had to grapple with really what was the sprint towards digital services in many cases, and that shedding of what was a lot of in-person manual processes, they're now taking a step back to rethink what should this look like? What does good look like in this space? And so it's a moment of reflection to talk about how we can actually improve on the way in which individuals assert their identities really in those online forums.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Great. So I have one answer with 4 parts, Ariel. Give them an inch, they take a foot. So I wanted to start by saying that I'm even on this panel is something that is different, because if you looked at the bio of where I work, the Center for Democracy and Technology, we are obsessed with privacy. We are obsessed with mitigating bias and inequity. And I think for a long time, folks who had that perspective were seen as agents of no, like we're just here to tell you reasons why you can't do something. So I would start with saying that there's a perception that this is not, I'm not an agent of no, but it's a yes and. Yes, we need to realize all the benefits that I know my panelists have talked about and will talk about. And we have to be just as focused on protecting people's privacy, because for a lot of folks, privacy is safety. Privacy is a barrier to accessing services, especially if they don't trust public agencies. So that's one. 2, I think that there's a shift that privacy is no longer viewed as just an issue of legal compliance. I think folks hopefully assume that, and I say this too, I worked in state government for 5 years, so I say this with much respect and humility, but that we're not breaking the law. I hope that that's what they expect. And really if you listen to what they're concerned about, it's, can you keep me safe? Can you make sure that my data doesn't fall into the wrong hands? Can you make sure that people aren't using this information about me to limit any kinds of opportunities? I think that's a really different question than, did the lawyer sign off on something and we can say that it's legally compliant? I think it's a different group of people involved. The third shift that I've seen and I'm excited about and would love to hear promising examples if y'all have any, is that, and I say this again, as my first blog in my job was 7 lessons from a recovering bureaucrat. So I say this with, again, a lot of respect. But that you don't have bureaucrats making unilateral decisions about what's good for people, but that you actually find meaningful ways to engage communities with an appreciation that communities are not a monolith and they have really different perspectives. And some folks who you're trying to target can be the hardest to reach. And so how do you incorporate them to make sure that 1, you're addressing their concerns, but 2, you're actually building something that they want and will find helpful. And the last thing that I'll say that I think is new in digital service delivery has 2 letters. Does anyone want to guess what they are? 2 letters. What? CS. AI. AI. That's a good answer too, though. So I think the other piece of this is AI, and it's already come up both in terms of the ways that it can really revolutionize a delivery of public services and work more efficiently and try and find patterns that we might miss. But we spend a lot of time also calling out the ways that it can have the exact opposite intent, which Ariel, you actually teed up really nicely yesterday, of the very things that we're putting in place to help people can also be the very tools that are used to discriminate them or limit opportunities. That's my 4-part answer to your 1 question.
I don't know about all of you, but I'm pretty excited for the table that we just set for this conversation. Thank you all for those opening thoughts. Rachel, can we turn to you now? I'd love to hear more about what's foundational to the way you all work at Sevilla and how that might be able to be scaled across the field.
Yeah, absolutely. So this image is a very helpful description. At Sevilla, we call this the person on the path. And this describes the approach that we take to human-centered design. So human-centered design is really central to the foundation of how we work in partnership with communities as well as government agencies. And I think for all the public servants in the office or in this auditorium, or the former public servants, it'll be familiar to you to know that you wake up every day, you came to this role because you care deeply about the communities you're serving. Yet because of policy constraints, technology, age-old technology, challenging business processes, you end up building some of these brick paths that you see here, even though your intention is to serve the community. And so central to our work is looking at how do we lift up the experiences of the users who are going to create their own path and who very well know their unique needs, and bring those, lift up those experiences to the agencies that we're partnering with and find creative solutions to address the technology constraints as well as policy and business process. So really central to us is thinking about how human-centered design, it's not just a phase in a project. This is a deep practice, a deep commitment. Over the last 7 years, there's not a week that's gone by that our team is not listening to folks who are navigating these systems and looking for ways to integrate their experiences as we're partnering with agencies to roll out new systems. And so a central piece is human-centered design, but then another piece that's really central for us is a commitment to implementation. So you can do a research sprint up front, but at the end of the day, when the rubber hits the road, how you implement it, given the user needs, the technology, and the business process is really when the value is shown. And I think human-centered design has become a bit of a buzzword. We've seen large-scale technology vendors use it in ways to promote maybe an early research phase or a late research phase, but it's not always done with the highest quality or integrity. But for us, we look at it, as I said, as a deep practice, and listening to people's experiences and carrying them through implementation is really central. And then the third piece in terms of implementation is when we're listening to folks' experiences, we also need that partnership from courageous leaders at state agencies. So we need to be lifting up their stories in creative ways. So a third part that is really central to our work is looking at creative storytelling with stakeholders. There's institutions are not designed to change. There's a lot of inertia to just maintain the status quo, but there's also courageous leaders who, again, are waking up every day looking to serve the community. And so we look for ways to lift up the experiences of folks navigating these systems and share that in new ways. And so one way that we do that is we have a immersive installation at our studio in Detroit, where we walk folks through the experience of navigating benefits. And through that, we've walked thousands of people through, and we've seen a few lessons from that. One is that folks will lean in when they hear people's lived experiences, as long as you're balancing quantitative data, but also speaking to them in terms of with their head and their heart. And so when we look at our approach to change and looking at how do we change these systems so it better meets the user's needs, we're thinking about a long-term commitment to human-centered design, committing through implementation, not just an early research phase, but looking at it from the beginning to the very end, and then engaging leaders in new ways so that they can really understand and lean in to take this risk and try a new way of working.
Thank you so much. There was a wish shared yesterday at the end of the day about scaling Sevilla so that every government could work with you all, which, in the longtime civic designer here, that was not a thing that people were even asking for. And so I think of really thinking about some transformational change that's happened recently, but also where we're headed. I'm really excited that we have people asking for that now in government. All right. Well, let's move on. Back to you, Amy. What are some of the big systemic shifts that need to happen to improve digital benefits delivery?
So I am a huge fan of simple solutions. So instead of describing the enterprise solution, or that I think could be a big seismic shift. I really love to focus on the building blocks that help us create the experiences, both for the public, our communities that we're serving, and for the staff that support and deliver those programs. And so within GSA and the General Services Administration and within the Technology Transformation Services, that's one of the approaches that we often take, is what are the building blocks that we can help provide programs. And so I think there's a lot of really interesting ways that we can take the current situations and make really meaningful improvements on them. And so one of those things that my team is specifically working on is around making sure folks have the right information at the right time. A lot of times I hear, oh, I'm working on this really big integrated eligibility system. It's like, okay, are people going to get the information they need at the right time? Because if they're not, your fancy new technology isn't going to matter that much, unfortunately. And so my team is working on a tool currently called US Notify that programs can use to send text messages to participants. And we're looking at a variety of different use cases, currently moving into pilot on that. There's a few other really exciting things that are happening across TTS. I think one of the other pilots that's happening across our organization is around thinking about digital identity, but not just in the digital space. How can we work with post offices and physical spaces that people across the country have access to? Even if you live in a really rural area, you likely have access to a post office where your nearest government office may be multiple hours drive away. So I think really thinking about these tweaks that we can make with the infrastructure that we have, totally acknowledge that we need to update our infrastructure. But I think thinking about the changes that we can make to take steps forward that actually really make a difference in how long it takes for people to access the programs that they're trying to access, and whether or not they continue to have access to those programs.
Great, thanks, Amy. Elizabeth, back over to you. Could you tell us more about how government can further incorporate equity into digital service delivery?
Sure, I can start the conversation, but spoiler alert, I do not have the answer. I'll start with just a bit of a story about some of the work that we've done around using data and technology ethically. I think it was 3 years at this point, we embarked on a research project just to understand what does it even mean, both in terms of interviewing folks in government who were attempting to do this, talking to foundations, talking to academics, reading anything we could get our hands on, really. And for as many papers as we read and people that we talked to, that's how many different definitions we got of what it meant to use data technology ethically and responsibly. So I'm going to offer the way I think about it, with a pretty significant caveat, which is that it can and should change. Using data ethically and responsibly and technology ethically and responsibly is not something you'll ever check off your list and say, did it, now we can move on to something else, because policies change, demographics change, people change. This is a dynamic field. So I offer that as just context setting to maybe lower the expectations of what I'm about to say. But I'll say in terms of how I think about equity in the context of digital service delivery, I think about it as a two-sided coin. On one side of the coin, it's a lot of what we've been talking about for the last 24 hours. It really is about making sure that benefits and all of the positive things that come from the use of data and technology are available to everyone. And so one example of that hasn't come up as much, but I'm sure y'all are all over, is closing the digital divide. So making sure that some of the things that we've talked about, that those things are available to everyone. Another example is being really focused on accessibility and making sure that the tools that you're providing work for individuals who have disabilities. One that is close to me is that families present in really different ways. And so how do your systems and your programs accommodate families that may not look the same as what it maybe has looked historically. So one side of the coin is really about maximizing benefits. The other side of the coin is being just as obsessed, again, this is a yes and, but being just as obsessed with making sure that no particular groups of individuals experience disproportionate and negative harm because of the use of data and technology. And I really believe that those things can and should go hand in hand. But one of the things that we've researched is in some states that have automated benefits determination and benefits, sort of the amount of benefits that you should receive, have had negative consequences. It's resulted in people losing benefits or losing the amount of benefits that they were receiving. Was that the intention? Of course not. Well, that's what I believe. And I, having worked with government folks, I mean, there's, maybe one or two people you encounter along the way where you're like, why are you here? But for the most part, folks are doing this work because they really care about helping people. And so what I really love about the work that we do and appreciate being, on this panel is that we can, there are better ways to do this. And how do we sort of shore up our skill set and our knowledge, our capacity to, put in place those guardrails that we need to make sure that we are maximized on all of those benefits. And that, sorry, I'm jumping ahead, so let me not scoop my own answer for a later question. But that both of those things can and should be done. So that's how I think about equity and how we think about it as a project. Again, knowing that I would love to hear about how y'all are thinking about it, because this is not something that, again, will ever be something that you say, well, now we can move on to something else because we've ensured that for, eternity, our systems will be equitable.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Jordan, over to you. What are the most important things government and industry should be doing as they implement digital systems to improve access to benefits?
Absolutely. So I'm curious, by a show of hands, and this includes those who are joining virtually, how many of you have had to wait online or like a phone in order to get access to a service or benefit, or maybe you had to go in person in order to engage in doing that? Okay, so just about majority. Now, keep your hand raised if that is your experience every single time you go to access a digital service. So there's a couple of hands where that's highlighted. I think that in and of itself highlights a problem that we see broadly within the industry today, is that for far too often for many people, that they are presented with friction every single time that they go to assert themselves, their identities online, and being able to prove who they are. Ultimately, a lot of that comes down to what are systemic gaps that exist in our identity infrastructure. If you were to ask me, and I say it quite frequently, I would say it's fragmented and broken ultimately. And it really comes to what is an over-reliance, and what I would say two different basic ways in which people prove their digital identities or their identities today, right? One being relying on what is the credit ecosystem as the proxy or the gatekeeper, if you will, for asserting someone's identity. For those who do not have, large financial backgrounds or who have not been engaged with that system, myself, I wasn't actually able to get a credit card approved until I was in my mid-20s. They're largely left out of that ecosystem. Furthermore, the alternative to it is when you're not using this heavy credit based approach, you're probably relying on what would be, they would say, foundational government documents at the end of the day in order to confirm who you are. I mean, some would say driver's licenses. Ultimately, well, if you look at Real ID in particular, you have the requirement that you have to have a social security card, you have to have birth certificate, so on and so forth. What happens in the instance that you don't have access to those things? How much burden are we putting on you in order to prove who you are? I often talk about my daughter, my youngest daughter, who when she was born, due to no fault of her own, due to a clerical error, she was not issued a social security card. And so one day in the hot Virginia sun, my wife and I had to venture down, because both of us had to be present with our daughter, to wait in line at the Social Security Administration in order to present the child and request that they release the number for her. Now, I did this because I recognize I work in the identity space, right? That it is necessary for what would be the future. But what happens if you, don't have the means in order to do that? Or furthermore, what if you're like me and my younger self, where I grew up in a family, and I think the technical term would be we grew up broke, where every hour spent not working was detrimental to our livelihood, right? Often living paycheck to paycheck and every hour being the difference between whether or not we were able to eat or pay the electric bill in particular. And don't get me wrong, there's, my father worked very hard in doing a lot of what he had to do to take care of our family, but the system wasn't necessarily set up to accommodate everything. So for those folks who don't have those foundational documents, they're further left out of the process and not being able to engage. Those are the two examples, I used to highlight, some of the gaps associated with identity, but even fast forwarding to, today, I very recently had to apply for a birth certificate. I realized later on that the thing I thought was a birth certificate was like a registration for birth, not the brightest individual. And so someone said you should go to the Department of Vital Statistics and go to get that applied. Well, when I went to apply, they asked me some questions about my history. Now, I was able to answer most of them. There was one question that stumped me, and using the same tactic that I used to get through college, eliminate two answers and guess 50-50 on one of them. Now that 50-50 answer, fortunately, I was able to get that right. But that was the difference between me being able to get my birth certificate and not being able to get it. Ultimately, we continue to put these types of barriers in front of people, and that keeps them out of the system, out of being able to engage ultimately. And the work that we do today, we find that the foundation basically needs to be shored up, and we need to start looking holistically at individuals beyond what would be these two facets in particular. There's other data points and elements that can be analyzed and evaluated in order to confirm that we can bring the right individuals into the process, that we can confirm that they can get their identities proved ultimately, and that they're not having to be left behind. When we get this wrong, we see instances of those long review wait queues, folks not being able to get processed. When we get this right, you have folks that are able in seconds to get access to the services that they so desperately need, and they're not having to wait. And ultimately, across the industry, what we need to be doing is increasing transparency about our ability as providers or those who serve in this space and work with organizations. I would also say the government as well, and I say this as a former Fed, we need to be a little more transparent, that we should be talking about the areas where our systems don't necessarily work for everyone, right? What is our ability to accurately identify individuals, right? What is the percentage of folks that have to go through some sort of friction or challenge ultimately, and what is our degree of accuracy in terms of being able to get it right? But only by doing that are we actually able to start, and there's many more metrics associated with that, but only by doing that are we actually able to start to hone in on some of the root cause problems as to why we're unable to get people through these online channels, versus defaulting to I would say in some cases, the belief that when you're unable to go online, you should just be able to go in person. Well, for those who raise their hand and they always have to go through that process, that shouldn't be the case. You should be able to, if you choose the online channel, being able to go and complete it through the online channel. I find it unacceptable personally that that's still the case in many instances. And so from my perspective, a lot of it comes down to, we all need to, come together and start to lean into measurement and transparency to start to try to address some of these, systemic barriers that we have today to being able to prove who you are.
Thank you so much for that, Jordan. I want to remind everyone that you have note cards. And so I hope you all have a lot of questions for these wonderful experts. And so I'm going to ask them some quick response questions now. So while you think of some more questions, and once you have a note card ready, if you could pass it to the end of your row and hold it, and we will have volunteers who are coming down the stairs to collect those. So back to all of you, we can go in any order. Anyone who would like to respond first. What are some of the positive trend lines that you're seeing right now?
Dialogue, I'll start. The awkward silence starts to kill me. My wife will throw something usually at me. No, I would say that dialogue in this space, honestly, is a positive trend line, right? Far too often there has been not enough conversation about what isn't working. And so, great events such as this allow us to actually be able to exchange ideas, thoughts about what is evolving, what does need to change, and then allowing us to better drive improved outcomes ultimately, right? It's only by starting to shine a light on these issues that we're able to really start to make the changes that we need in this space.
I'll help Jordan out so there's no more extra
Thank you.
Awkward silence.
Thank you.
I think we're seeing a lot of leadership on the front of really trying to modernize privacy and try and get ahead of especially AI. It just even in the past year, the current administration has put out an AI Bill of Rights, which if you haven't seen, you should look at that, which is really about sort of ensuring that we're not exacerbating inequities by the use of AI and are really being intentional about it. My boss yesterday was testifying on the Hill. There are a lot of hearings about privacy and AI and human rights and just these conversations that really feel like they're picking up momentum. And so, as a someone who is not running an agency, I think there's still a lot of meaningful work that can happen, but it sure is a lot easier if you have, a directive and leadership saying, this is important and this is how we're going to respond to it. And sometimes that does take there being a law or a regulation or a rule to sort of bring folks into compliance. But I think I'm seeing a lot of, sort of exciting momentum and leadership on really providing rules and regulations, also just guidance of, I know when I was working in states, I hung on every word would come out around how to do something. And especially if there were tools, I'm like, this is great, we're doing this. So I think we're seeing a lot more momentum, especially at the federal level around some of these issues, which is very welcome and in many cases overdue.
I would love to add on that. Speaking of leadership, we are seeing more and more leaders lean into prioritizing deep research prior to building technology. And that's really exciting because I think we've all navigated very archaic technology systems when we're trying to access different services. And we've seen in Michigan and across many other states as well, the value of leaning in upfront, of investing upfront in understanding the user needs of the folks who are navigating these systems, whether that's both the clients, the residents we're serving, as well as the staff. And so we've seen more and more state agencies, instead of us convincing them of the value, they're really coming and being like, we understand the value. And so we want to invest upfront. I think in Michigan, the My Bridges portal is a really great example. This is the portal that residents use to access benefits for the full enrollment process, from applying to renewing, uploading documents, and post-eligibility support. And from the Sevilla partnered with a large-scale tech vendor to do, and MDHS, to do deep research up front and highlight those needs that residents and staff have. And that led to a 50% drop in time to apply, 1,300% increase in uploads of documents. And so over 2.5 million residents in Michigan are using this system every day. And we found that that is a really helpful proof point for many other state agencies. And again, this was something that really supported the state when COVID hit, so that those folks could access the benefits they need. So yeah, that's a really positive and exciting step in the future we're seeing, is that people really, and agencies and leaders are really leaning in to prioritize that upfront research with communities.
And I'll build off of the dialogue comment. I think there's a lot of both cross agency and cross sector collaboration that is building and happening right now, which is fantastic. I think one of the things that enables us to do is shift to from, hey, government talking to government, like, what do we think is the problem here? What do we think is a cool idea? To shifting to, okay, what are the actual lived experiences of the people that we're serving, and how can we start to orient around that? And so I think it's really exciting to see communities coming together that include government and advocates, that include people that are fighting for language justice, that we're actually starting to think about all of these different experiences that people have when they interact with our services, versus just, hey, it's hard to do things in government. And so, which is absolutely true, but our mission is not to make government easier for ourselves. Our mission is to serve the public. And so I think it's really exciting to see a shift in both, okay, it is government's mission to do that, but we can't do that by ourselves. We must do that in collaboration with the ecosystem that we are a part of. So I am very excited to be here, as you can tell. But I think it's just a really positive trend that I hope continues to build.
Yeah, I agree. I love that trend that we all get to hang out with each other and work together. And having popped around a few different organizations that work in this space, it's also neat to see it from different angles. And I think several of us have made moves across this space too. I'm going to save my last question because I have seen a lot of note cards moving in this room. Okay. Oh, your mic went out. Okay. All right. The first question is, what new customer-centered performance might you all recommend for SNAP, UI, Medicaid, et cetera? Clarification likely means customer-centered performance metrics.
Jordan.
So y'all know I'm going to jump.
Jordan?
You know, I'm gonna jump, but I was trying to fight it. So look, looking at perspective of digital identity, right? There's some 4 core ones that I tend to look at. Just to start off, right? Your ability in, you know, in our business we call them auto approval, but the ability to approve someone's identity or verify someone's identity online without them having to be subjected to undue friction is one thing. It's because you can start to then from there, if you get more information beyond that, again, this is a core you're supposed to build on top of it. If you get more information beyond that, you can understand like what are the reasons why they fall out. Right, we see upwards of 50% abandonment rates in online processes from the experience when there's too much friction as part of it. Other things that you should be looking at are false positives or false negative rates, because not only false positives because you're inadvertently subjecting someone to undue burden in order to prove who they are, but from a false negative standpoint, look, we have a fraud problem as well that must be called out. And it's not to say that should prevent us from delivering services or that we should make it so draconian that folks cannot get access to those benefits. But there's ways in which you can manage simultaneously challenges with security and fraud along with managing what would be the customer experience. Other things, and if you're looking at what would be the broader return on investment or management of solutions, would be the cost of manual review to an organization, or how much manual review is being done, right? There is person hours that are associated or allocated towards that. And that also translates to how long our review queues are going to be, how many lines are going out the door, right? Those are for me, success measures as to how, if you're able to get those lower, right? What that ends up looking like ultimately. And a lot of that, the last piece would be around, and again, I work in the identity space, fraud capture, right? Your percentage of you actually being able to stop the bad guys at the door. And that's because, what we saw is that, the fraud that took place during the pandemic, it wasn't a one-time event. It's something that's been persisting. There was a great event that took place, which is why it became mainstream. But they're not going to stop. And as we hear with, stories of SNAP, as individuals have had their benefits intercepted, and, fortunately, some states have been able to help make them whole. As a result, that's not the case all the time. And some individuals turn away from the process when they find it too hard to be able to recover their identity. And so it's important that you're also able to have a high degree of being able to capture and identify more or less, what the fraudsters are. And again, that's my view on how do you start to improve these access to services from looking at it under the identity lens.
I agree with Jordan.
Fantastic.
I'll hop in here. I think in terms of metrics and customer experience, looking at how long it takes people to do things, how long it takes them to fill out an application, how long it takes that application to get a determination, how long it takes for people to then receive the benefits that they applied for. I think there's things around how long it takes internally within the government to process that and to get the information that we need, and how much of that are we doing that utilizes the data that we already have versus asking people for information that we could find ourselves. And so those are some big ones that are just like in the eligibility process, what can we measure? I also think the things that are harder to measure are the things that around people that we are not currently serving. So one of my least favorite biases, I don't know, I try to keep this in mind. it's called the survivorship bias, where we tend to optimize for the people that make it through because they're the people that we have contact information for. So we can reach out to them for user research. But guess what? The people that didn't make it all the way through the process, we don't have their contact information. And it's much harder for us to go and actually learn why they fell out of the process. And so when we make system optimizations, we often are optimizing for the people that it's working for, even if it's hard. And so I don't have a metric to put on that, but I think it is, there could be just some binary things on like, are we taking actions to understand, to actually work with communities that are not making it through the process versus are we doing user research in the first place?
I would definitely second, third, both of those answers. I think the only other thing I would add was it's, again, probably not exactly a performance metric, but is who are we speaking to and how are we measuring that? We take a lot of effort to look at the variety of users that we're engaging with. Some folks that are harder to reach if you're using, say, like usertesting.com or an online platform. So we're looking at community partners, nonprofits that are active in the region. How do we find folks that are connected to those communities and that they can refer them to us? So we're getting a range of folks in urban versus rural counties in all parts of the regions of the state. And yeah, I think that's a harder thing to measure, but it's often, the success is often shown in the final product when it does meet their needs.
The next question is actually for you, Rachel, so we'll stick with you. The importance of implementation and follow through was raised by Sevilla, i.e. not doing discovery research in a vacuum. What are examples of the timeline or approaches you've seen as working or not working?
Great question. Let's see, I think I will start maybe with speaking. Yeah, I'll start speaking from there's a few technology projects I've been on. One was the My Bridges portal, which I mentioned. Now I'm actively on the child welfare system. We're redesigning the case management system for workers who are processing child welfare cases. And we've seen that the discovery research up front, the size of the research really depends on the size of the module or the technology. So in the case of child welfare, they've broken up this huge case management system into multiple modules. And so we are matching the size of our research to the size of the module, and so the amount of functionality that exists. So discovery research could look like anything upfront from 3 months, for example, for an intake, which is if there's a case of abuse or neglect in your community, you're calling to, there's someone who's picking up the phone, processing that case, or investigation, which could be a longer process where the family is actually being investigated, unfortunately. And so there's a lot of back and forth between the caseworker and the family. And so we've seen in our research, it could be from 3 months to right now, we're on about like 9 months of discovery research upfront. And so this is it's a big investment for leaders to make upfront before we're building. How do we actually understand the real needs? And so we've been doing discovery research for it's going to be almost like a year and a half before some of the technology is being built. So I think that is a general sense, but again, it can be pared down and expanded depending on different needs, depending on the size, and also kind of depending on the partnership.
Anyone else want to respond on timeline? Cool. This is a good one. I also believe that anyone should be able to access services online. Do you have concerns that as online access improves, in-person access will go away, then affecting those who already have limited access?
No. So I don't have, because I would put it this way. One of the things that, and I will speak as a former Fed, one of the things that are top of mind for anyone in government is making sure that there are pathways to being able to access services in particular. I do view that we are at a point in time where, as we start to embrace the technologies needed in order to allow us to operate and conduct transactions in an online manner, that if we're not careful, in some cases, we could see the pendulum swing the other way, where we're almost forced back to in-person interaction only. And so I think that with the right level of transparency, the right level of discussion around the types of tools, techniques, tactics being used. In particular, we're able to see what would be a movement towards online first for those that want to use it. But from a government standpoint, there will always be an in-person option or something that's made available, because there are those who just will not go through the online channel, right? They don't have access to it, and it is too burdensome to try to get them access to it in particular. And so it's about being able to adapt to those in particular, and understanding what the impact is broadly of what is the shift to using online more.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I was talking to states at a conference recently, and one of the things that they brought up was that the pandemic has highlighted both how important digital access is and how important the offices are. And so I think I would be surprised if all of that went away. There would have to be a big seismic shift for that to happen. But I do think that it's interesting, even though we're talking about, okay, the pandemic helped us bolster all of our digital systems. The opposite also has happened. We're like, wow, our offices are critical pieces of our infrastructure. And there's some really interesting examples where states have kiosks that access their portal in the office, where they help people sign up for things online and get that going. So they're going in person and getting them set up so that then they can do things online in the future. And so I think those intersections are really interesting, where we can overlap the different levels of our services and make sure that we are treating people with dignity throughout any door that they come through.
Yeah, we actually just published a case study on work in Oklahoma from their Department of Human Services, where over the last handful of years, they've downsized their offices. They got rid of a lot of old buildings, and they have built these beautiful, dignified, modern spaces, including for sensitive situations like child welfare cases, and have really thought about the technology that underpins that. And also have not laid anyone off. So no workers lost their jobs. They have been deploying more people into community where people actually are. And they also have some very interesting, more public and shared metrics about that work too. So it's definitely something, it's up on the Digital Benefits Hub, something that we think is an approach that could scale to other states as well as they're thinking about their real estate strategy.
And I think from a privacy perspective, that's one of the things that we recommend, especially the more invasive the type of technology is, the more you want to give people options, which can include in person. It could include, other sort of maybe less invasive types of technology, especially when you're talking about facial recognition. But I think optionality was talked about a lot yesterday. And I think this is a space that it's really important to keep that in mind too.
Anyone else? Cool. If you could change one thing about government IT enablement practices, what would you change?
Just one.
Yeah,
Let's start with one. Well, if you all list, we'll have a list of 4.
1A, 1B.
I'll hop in. I think one of the things that we are really focused on is helping people start somewhere. A lot of times, and before I was in this role, I worked as a consultant. I consulted with states on integrated eligibility and enrollment systems. A lot of times we see we need the enterprise, like this whole spaceship to be built, and that is what is going to equal success. And guess what? Most of the time the spaceship fails. And in the time that you were working on that, you could have delivered some really meaningful things. And so it's not that the aspiration is bad, but how can we break things into smaller pieces that we can try sooner and build on and build on? So that's one of the things that we're trying to do with our pilots, is really to enable programs to try text messaging at all, because we realize that that is a huge hurdle in just trying it. You don't need to send a text message to every person in your state. You could target a very small population and a very particular program to understand, hey, is this going to create the outcomes that we are looking for before we go through all of the hullabaloo of rolling this out and updating all of our systems and doing X, Y, and Z? What can you try in a couple months? Instead of saying, I heard lots of stories, procurement timelines take years, like 5 years. Well, what could you do in a shorter time period of a couple months to learn something that you can then build on, so that by the time you get to that 5-year mark, you have a whole lot to show for it?
I think I want to piggyback on that and talk about performance-based testing in like those short sprints. Far too often it may be only set a lot of procurements, and I've also been engaged with various procurements where there were those long drawn out timeframes. In particular, I would say it would be intriguing, and and actually something I would recommend we continue to move towards is taking more of these incremental performance-based measures. So vendors or those who are working in the space who are looking to help meet the requirements of the government are actually put through their paces up front. So that way you have an understanding of who is best likely to meet and match the use case. That way you're not getting a year into a procurement, a deployment, realizing it does not work, trying to fix it, and then having to about face and do it all over again. And you're actually able to identify really the best solution fit for purpose, such that it can serve the needs of the public.
I think for me, this question makes me think of a piece of advice I got in terms of meeting facilitation, which is that when you go into a meeting, you need to have a goal, and the goal can either be at the end of this meeting, we will have solved this problem, or at the end of the meeting, we will have agreed on a process to solve the problem. And they're actually really different. And I was just reflecting on, since this project has existed, I don't think we've written anything that didn't talk about the importance of governance, like little g governance. And I think so many of the decisions that we see that are made and that I was a part of, or sometimes not a part of, I'm like, why did you do that? It comes back to, do you have the right process in place and the right perspectives and skill sets, which gets to community involvement. It also gets to, are you pairing your program folks with your IT folks, with your privacy folks to make really informed decisions? So I think it's a little bit of a cheat answer, but I do think I would really focus on the people who are around the table when all of these decisions are being made, because I don't think this is a meeting where at the end of it, you'll have the answer. But I think you can decide on for different, types of decisions, who are the people that need to be involved, so that not just what you have planned, there's so many things that aren't planned. Like, where do you take those things? And so often they're crises, and they fall in someone's lap, and maybe they don't make the best decisions. So I would make a pitch for not coming to, here's the answer, but here's the process we're going to go through each time these things come up that will get us to the answer.
Yeah, I really like that point on process and both of what you both shared. I think building off of that, the importance again of building in smaller sprints. I think we've seen in past technology projects, the focus on the waterfall method of like taking years and years and years to build and to prepare and then to do the big bang launch, and doesn't always land well. And so the importance of doing these iterative sprints. However, as we've been partnering with agencies in Michigan to do that, it's really hard. There's really there's like conflicts with the way that government institutions work and with the way that technology is developed, ideally through like agile or shorter sprints. And so they're trying to find creative ways to meet the requirements and the budgeting that they have to set up front with the needs of the users, which we know is better met through these iterative cycles. And I think the other thing I would add is just the interview process for vendors. It's just so hard for agencies to find a diverse range of different vendors that can build the systems for them. I think the RFPs are extremely long and complex. If anyone's, I'm sure many other people have gotten some like eye twitches from reading these very long RFPs or writing them. And so they're really catered to larger companies and agencies that can invest in that. And then once they actually get to the interview process, I've talked to state partners who they're trying to make the best decisions they can, but they don't have all the information that they need to make a call in sometimes those moments. And so we've seen in Michigan, they're looking for really creative ways to get a better sense of what is this vendor going to deliver to me before I sign on to a multi-million-dollar 10-year contract. And that's such a huge investment. It's such so much pressure to put on individuals to make upfront. And so how did they find better ways and partnership with others to make better decisions in those moments, but to have access to better information and to make sure that what they're being pitched is actually what's available, and that they maybe have the right people around the table who can ask the right questions to really dig into what are you promising me and what am I actually going to get.
All right, we only have a few minutes left, so we're going to end with a rapid fire. We did a collective community wish list, but I wanted to hear from these four. What's their one wish for the future of digital benefits delivery?
I can start because this is where I almost scooped my own answer, and then I remembered later you were going to ask me. And it's not one of my wishes that I wrote down yesterday. So I'm going to make awkward eye contact with many of you, and online, I can't see you, but I see you. My wish is that we all see a role for ourselves in supporting privacy, in supporting the equitable use of data and technology, and that even if you don't see a role for yourself, like this won't work if it's just one person's job. It won't work if it's just two people's job. Like this has to be part of our value system, and that the digital service delivery, we will only achieve those benefits if we all, you get to equity through that. You get to equity through protecting people's privacy, through building trust. So I hope if you didn't come into this panel, thinking that, sometimes I go to panels and I'm like, oh, I'm about to hear about something really hard that has nothing to do with me. So hopefully you're walking out and there's a little kernel and a little, seed you feel like you can pick up and plant for yourselves in your home organization. And we're here to, we've got Miracle Grow, we've got a great shovel, we've got all of the tools that are ready to help. But that's my wish, is that, we're bought into this and we can work together to, realize a lot of the vision that we talked about.
Yeah, but if I was to go, I would say that, getting to a point where the services that we're seeking to deliver specifically within government are seamless, right? And it's not something that can be, or that is very hard for individuals to get through. Now, I'm not going to lie and say that there haven't been strides that have been made. There absolutely are. I run into states and other federal agencies who are making changes and improvements every single day, but we're not there across the board. So getting to this end state of nirvana, if you will, where everything is seamless and it works basically is the same as you would expect of what happens in the commercial world for products and services that we're using. That's what I would like to see. And I think, for us to start to set some of that foundation, going to be a broken record here, leaning into what is the transparency and measurement, right? Because we have to be able to identify where are those gaps, where are things not working, where are there systemic issues in how we've designed things and we haven't designed with equity in mind that are preventing folks from being able to get through the process.
Yeah, I would say in the near term, I would hope that access to benefits is available digitally through the full life cycle of the case. So we're seeing some states where you can apply online, but then you're renewing on paper, or you're searching for all your documents around town and faxing them in, trying to find a fax machine, or then you're calling your worker. And so if there's a way that we can, in the future, to have that full enrollment process, that full eligibility, everything that you need, that process to be available digitally, I think that is a wish that we have in the near term. And we're seeing a lot of states lean into that. And then I think something that we would love to see more momentum on in the long term is more cross enrollment between agencies. So if I'm applying for unemployment insurance and I'm waiting to hear back about my case, how about you refer me to the Health and Human Services agencies so that I can access food stamps or medical insurance? And then you can send me to find some resources on jobs or housing. And so seeing more connecting the dots between these agencies, I think is something that we would love to see in the long term. But a big piece of that is around digital identity, is around finding ways that agencies can do data sharing between them. So that is definitely a hope and wish that we have for the future.
Can I do two?
We'll allow you to.
I'll go fast. They're the same. It's long-term and short-term. Okay, I'll start with long-term. And that is my wish is that we could really create a world where we are centered on the people, the families that we serve. And that is can be lip service, but I mean reorgs, going way beyond data sharing agreements, to actually being these are families, these are people, let's make sure that we are organizing around them. And that can be a seamless experience as you navigate across government. I know there are risks involved in that, but this is wish time. In the shorter time frame, I think my wish is really continuing to see organization around outcomes. So what is the change that we are hoping to see in this investment? And just being really, really specific about that. If we're going to spend $1, $1 million, $1 billion, what do we hope to see as a result of that investment? Because a lot of times we start with solutions. We're like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we had this shiny object?
Right.
And I would love for us to just double down on what is the change that is going to happen if we do this thing, and is it worth doing? Otherwise, let's find the changes that we really want to see that really actually mean a lot to the people that we serve, versus the things that we think are cool.
Well, thank you all so much. I hope that you all have a conversation now that you can be coming back to when you need a dose of reality, a little inspiration, and a look to the future. So let's give this panel a big round of applause. All right, we're going to take a short break and we'll be back in a few minutes with our lightning talk. So please feel free to leave the auditorium, get a drink, use the restroom, and join us back in here in just a few minutes. Oops.
It's nice to sit next to someone who can't tolerate the silences.
No,
Picking you up.
it's such a problem.
Yeah, I need time to process that. Yeah. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. We're about to get started.
Hi there. Can everyone hear me all right? Yes. All right. So for those of you who I have not met, my name is Elizabeth Bynum Sorrell, and I am the researcher with the Digital Benefits Network. It is my distinct pleasure to be introducing a series of short lightning talks on innovative ideas, approaches, and pilots to better understand and improve benefits delivery in the US. On this slide, you can find a QR code and link to our speaker bios. And first up, I'd like to welcome Jeremiah Garcia Ramadan, the Director of Governance and Innovation at the Arizona Department of Economic Security. Today, Jeremiah will be sharing about DES's unique perspective on benefits delivery and how that is driving innovation for the agency, their workforce, and their clients. All right, Jeremiah.
Hello, thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Just want to say a big thank you to Elizabeth and Chanel and Ariel and everyone at the Beck Center and the sponsors for putting on BenCon. It's already been such an incredible experience, and I'm really thankful for the opportunity to get to speak to you all today. As Elizabeth said, I'm Jeremy Garcia Ramadan. I also go by Jeremy in case that throws anyone off. And I am here from the great state of Arizona to give everyone a state perspective on improving benefit service delivery. I do want to say a special good morning to those in Arizona that signed on pre-8 a.m. To hear this talk. Thank you so much. And for those of my team that are listening, really thank you. Everything that I'm going to talk about today is obviously you all driving. So just to introduce a little bit about the Arizona Department of Economic Security. Many of you may know that we are a very large human service agency administering over 60 programs. We are uniquely positioned in that we are one of the very few states that have our traditional human service safety net programs housed within the same department as our workforce programs, like unemployment insurance and the WIOA programs. Leaders from our organization conduct strategic planning together. We problem solve together. We literally sit side by side administering these programs. So we are uniquely positioned to innovate and improve service delivery across the spectrum. During the pandemic, we both managed the unprecedented number of claims for unemployment insurance while also implementing pandemic nutrition programs, all while ensuring that we protected the most vulnerable populations in Arizona, such as individuals with developmental disabilities. That experience has only strengthened our clarity on the unique role that we can play in improving benefit service delivery. We are well positioned at DES in Arizona to be an incubator for the compassionate, fiscally responsible innovation we need in government. So I want to start to just orient you on some of the challenges and opportunities that we're able to see at DES in our service delivery. As I said, we have over 60 programs, but many of our clients interact with a variety of our programs and face, varying eligibility criteria. There's considerable overlap and duplication and very little streamlining happening at all levels of government, and really even less interagency and interdepartmental interaction that we see. Staff on the front lines must train to and manage this complexity while dealing with compassion fatigue and secondary trauma. And because each program is so complex, the rules, the eligibility, the requirements, staff cannot become experts in the breadth of human service programs. So there has to be all of this additional infrastructure that's created to support this complexity at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level, at the tribal level. Additionally, we are working with aging technology, legacy mainframe systems that make it very challenging for us to make changes for innovation or even for law changes and regulation changes. There is also a focus on activities rather than outcomes. I don't mean to call out our federal partners, and I am a former Fed myself, but really there is a focus at the federal level on timeliness and accuracy of point of contact benefit or service delivery, rather than on what those activities really mean in the lives of the people that we serve, which necessarily means that we are incentivized at DES to design our program to those metrics. This is changing, and I was actually really excited to see within the Fiscal Responsibility Act, the TANF outcome measures language. I'm really excited that there is going to now be this push for focusing on outcomes. The structure at DES means that we're acutely aware of the silos between programs, and we hear every day how incredibly frustrating it can be for people we serve. Arizonans do not live in silos, but they are required to navigate sometimes confusing, conflicting, inefficient program requirements to obtain the services they need to live their best lives. I'm introducing our team because I know many of you have teams within your organizations that have been created to do something similar, and I'd love to partner and have dialogue with you all. But the Governance and Innovation Administration was created in 2021. We are focused on improving client outcomes and employee engagement, modernizing governance and service delivery, and introducing policy and process efficiencies, innovations, and cross-divisional alignment. My team's real purpose is to serve as the model at the enterprise level for how strong governance structures can actually create the room for innovation and to build that capacity across the policy teams and governance teams across the department. I'm so grateful to my team in Arizona for building this support and infrastructure at DES. I'm also lucky enough, because of this administration and what we've created, is to have space within our department to think deeply about challenges facing our systems and the people that we serve. This deep thought work has allowed us to create structure around understanding and improving the interconnectivity of all of our programs, understanding how pulling the levers in one area can substantively impact the outcomes of clients in many areas. One of the projects our team is working on is an eligibility matrix. And this is probably exactly what it sounds like. It's a matrix that catalogs the eligibility requirements of DES income-based assistance programs. And we are defining eligibility requirement as any requirement that would cause a denial of benefits. We're hoping this project allows us, and it has actually allowed us, to compare, contrast, and analyze eligibility requirements of DES income-based assistance programs in order to identify areas of opportunity across those programs. We are trying to use this matrix to ask questions such as, can we, DES, better advocate for eligibility decisions that lead to meaningful outcomes for the clients and reduce the regulatory burden for those clients and the state? Can we align DES assistance eligibility requirements across our programs to better and more efficiently support the family's goals? For example, which of our income-based assistance programs require that a dependent child be in the household? How many applications do you have to fill out? Which programs have an employment requirement? This confusion can be a barrier to services. Here's an example of some information coming out of the matrix. It turns out that there is no one way that we define the group of people that is considered when applying for a program. So the family, but what does that matter, right? Why does it matter that Medicaid uses budgetary group while TANF uses family assistance or assistance unit? Well, the way that we define this one term often determines whose income, assets, employment are counted towards eligibility and determines who is essentially eligible for benefits. Analyzing how and where these terms are used and streamlining where appropriate and allowable will lead to policy and rules that are more clear, concise, and understandable, and thus can be implemented in a more effective, efficient manner. Additionally, streamlining the use of these terms supports the longer-term goal of streamlining the application process, where a family in need of support is not treated differently in different programs. Additionally, in Arizona and across our nation, we have multi-generational families. We have congregate residential settings. We have tribal communities that all introduce a beautiful nuance to the term family. And they hit barriers in accessing services because of the way that we define family across our programs. I'm really excited about the potential of partnering with the DBN to see how rules as code might be the next step in our journey to reduce the complexity for the families we serve and the staff that are serving them. So going back a little bit to what I said around our aging IT, in 2020, we had a consultant come in and analyze the DES application portfolio to understand the business fitness and technical quality application infrastructure. This data is somewhat dated, obviously, going back to 2020, and there has been some movement, but this still provides a decent approximation of current state at DES. So according to the consultant, 44% of the applications in our portfolio, so less than half, are in a sufficient condition to warrant continued investment. Another 16% have reasonable technical quality, but weak business fitness. Those are the ones we tolerate. And 40% of the application portfolio requires immediate replacement due to technical deficiencies. We need to migrate it to a new platform, or both technical and business deficiencies, meaning we just need to eliminate it altogether. Many of our business processes are paper-based manual processes that require re-entry of data across systems, obviously reducing productivity and delaying the time to benefits for clients. And it's really expensive to maintain, including introducing redundant capabilities. There's also definitely a challenge with skills, as there are talent gaps across the infrastructure. So what are we doing about it? Like many states, our tech roadmap includes modernizing our systems. So the UI system, our rehabilitation services system, our child support system, all are going through modernization projects. But we're also creating a client portal that will provide one point of entry for our clients across our programs, and hopefully taking from some of what we heard earlier on the panel and not trying to bite off the whole project, but take it in little increments. We really, really want to move the relationship between our staff and clients from transactional to relational, and we want our tech to support that vision. At the same time, we want to avoid or at least mitigate the unintended consequences of modernization. We're contemplating how to get meaningful feedback from users at all points in the design process, and to ensure that we are compensating those users for their time and thought work. Several BenCon participants have helped me think of really innovative ways that we can be doing this, the way that we describe that compensation and how we don't impact other benefits that they may be receiving. We're also conscientious, oh my gosh, I can't talk. Sorry about that, guys. Of who is going to be able to access digital benefits, and ensure that our state's digital equity plan is seeking to address gaps, and that we continue to offer an array of service modalities, including physical offices. As we heard earlier today, that's not going away, and that's not our intention. We want to prevent people from being left behind on our modernization journey and be modernizing in all service points of entry. So thank you so much for your time. My goal here really was to tell you a little bit more about what we're doing, because if you're doing something similar, or if your organization supports this work, please reach out to me. I neglected to leave my contact information on here, but I have business cards, and I'm sure anyone on the BenCon team would be happy to connect you. I'm really, really hoping that I can leverage relationships here to improve what we're doing in Arizona. And I just wanted to leave with one final thought. Really, the complexity of our programs is a barrier for both the people that we serve and the staff that are on the front line supporting those families and individuals. Innovation for staff must happen, or we will not get innovation for our clients. Thank you again, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.
All right, thanks so much, Jeremiah. Next up, I'd like to introduce Sarah Esty, Senior Advisor for Technology and Delivery at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. In her role, Sarah co-leads the Facing Financial Shocks initiative to help states deliver the full set of public benefits. Today, she will be sharing about that work. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. So it's great to be here with all of you. To talk about work that got kicked off about a year and a half ago with the signing of the Customer Experience Executive Order in December 2021. And that executive order laid out a strong federal priority around improving the service delivery of core benefits. And it both challenged individual agencies that work directly with the public, programs like Medicare and Social Security, to make sure they were doing the best job they could in making it easy to access benefits. They also challenge groups of agencies that together need to deliver benefits to people at times of need where that surpasses anything a single agency can do to work better together. And so that resulted in the creation of 5 interagency life experience teams. Ours is around facing financial shocks, which is thinking about how to streamline service delivery for low-income families facing the loss of income of up to $400 or increased expenses. And when that happens, people need fast, easy access to benefits so that they don't end up in a downward spiral of having to take out a payday loan, maybe losing a job because they can't fix their car to get to work, those types of things that can really knock people out and start a downward spiral. And so we started with the goal of saying, what would it take so that people know the full set of benefits they're eligible for? They can apply to that full set of benefits in 20 minutes. They can get their determinations back in 24 hours. They only need to submit their data once. They can start accessing the benefits within a week, and they can stay enrolled as long as they're eligible. So that's our North Star. We know that that is actually almost here in a couple states and some programs, and that is very far away for other programs in other states. So we began with talking to people going through the system to understand the pain points and experiences they were having, and heard about the challenges they face in the upfront enrollment and access for those services, long processes to apply, interview requirements, waits to hear back, no updates on their cases. We also heard about challenges using their benefits, staying enrolled, meeting program requirements, staying enrolled at renewal, and not being able to use benefits for the things that they needed. And then finally, we've heard about transition challenges. So you hit a benefits cliff and can't actually get to stability. You have an asset test that doesn't let you save, and that makes it hard to ever leave a cycle of poverty. When our team sat down and thought about which part of the process we were going to focus on, we were pretty realistic about the things that an interagency federal team can do without major amounts of new money and major changes to legislation. And so that really honed our focus into that first bucket around access. So then we went out to talk to states and to understand they're trying to run most of these programs well. The vast majority of states want these programs to be a good experience, easy for people to access, and not a huge burden on their staff. And when they try, there are so many challenges they face that lead to a lot of the pain points we heard from people. So there are complex, conflicting federal policies with different definitions and different requirements across programs. There are silos around how you can use funding, how you can run your operations, how you run your tech systems. They often don't have the people that they need. They may not have service designers. They may not have tech product managers. They may not have people who don't have a day job and have the flexibility and the time to work on new innovative solutions. There is also a compliance orientation where the federal oversight and supervision and the messages they get are all about program integrity and following the rules. And we rarely talk about the dignity of the person going through the benefits process, the ease of access of that person, the timeliness of delivery. We are not holding them necessarily accountable for those things. And so that is not what they focus on. And we also know that there is real inequity and unevenness across geographies and demographics. And some of that is funding differences. Some of that is systems that were designed for certain types of people that are not serving everyone well. But we also know there are ways to make this work better. And I had the privilege of serving as the policy director in Michigan at the Department of Health and Human Services while they were undergoing a major transformation of their benefits delivery system, and got to see firsthand what that looks like when you overhaul a form, you overhaul a business process, you really think about training and delivery for caseworkers and how they are delivering services at the front lines, and what it looks like to have real change champions at all levels pushing for this work. So we've identified about 9 different things that we think you will want to have in place for a successful benefits program. From the front end applications, streamlined, redesigned, multi-program and multi-channel, including mobile first responsive design for your online forms, plain language notifications and outreach mechanisms that are also pushes at useful touch points, a culture of access and human-centered design from all angles of your delivery system, including embedded into what you're holding staff accountable for, data-driven determinations and renewals, and strong back-end data systems that give you the data you need to do that automated and expedited processing, harmonized policy and legal frameworks that do find ways to bridge different programs into a single application, single caseworker, single determinations that resolve privacy and consent issues and that make the whole system work. streamline business processes, so actually revamping the caseworker process for doing eligibility determinations and the applicant and renewal experience from the perspective of the beneficiary. Emphasis on a talent strategy for caseworkers and frontline workers, as well as your tech and data staff. Effective digital services procurement and IT system management, because if your backbone systems are not working well, the whole thing is going to be very hard to do, no matter if you do everything else. And then finally, you're going to need a leadership commitment to make all of these things happen. And there are excellent best practices out there across the country in each of these. And there are very exciting places where many of these building blocks are together at once. And that is the truly catalytic outcome, is when you can put a number of the puzzle pieces together. So what is our theory of change for our team? First, we want to figure out how to lower the barriers to entry for states to replicate best practices, highlight those best practices, pull out the replicable elements, and then help the states adopt them. Second, we want to innovate to create new solutions where the models don't exist or aren't working well. Third, we want to build dedicated multi-program delivery capacity at the state and federal levels. This work will get done when there are people and money to do the work. And without that, it's really hard to build and sustain. And then finally, we need a culture change. And that is a federal culture change, a state culture change, and an ecosystem-wide commitment to say we are valuing ease, dignity, and access in our programs. And think about what that looks like at every level. So how are we actually turning that theory of change into practice? So first, we're trying to identify and bless effective state models. And that's why we're so excited to be at forums like this, where we get to hear directly from you, state leaders, local leaders, technical assistance partners, nonprofits, folks convening and funding this work about what's working. We're working to publish plain language guidance. So a couple of weeks ago, we helped organize a training for the Federal Communications Commission with over 400 state and local leaders to hear about the legal ways to do text messaging for benefits delivery. And so it's things like that that say, yes, you are allowed to do this, and we are going to get the right people in front of you to give you that permission. Then we're thinking about how to deliver technical assistance on multi-program operations. And a lot of the federal government is really more focused on policy and regulation. And so this is a new approach to think more about what does operation support and multi-program operation support look like. Finally, we're thinking about developing modular tools, templates, and service offerings to think about those building blocks we talked about and how we can help advance each of those, but also make sure they'll fit together at the end. On innovation, our two main areas of focus are equitable and automated income verification services. And we know that this is a huge possibility if we can better help states access existing federal and other data sources to do easy income verifications. And we also know that this is not a place that has worked excellently in the past, and so that there are more opportunities to do better and to expand. And the federal government has a unique role in being able to convene, coordinate, and support states in doing that. Second, working on procurement and IT vendor management. And that is probably a thing you may have experienced or heard about as a major blocker. It is also one that we continue to hear there are not great models and examples. And so we want to do more research with all of you to understand maybe there are models that haven't been lifted up, or let's roll up our sleeves and try some new things together. We have been able to do this because we've established a federal multi-program benefits team, the State Benefits Accelerator. So we have folks able to work on these problems day in, day out, to work boots on the ground with states, to work at the federal level on these innovation teams. And we also are working on external partnerships to get support for our state partners. And that is thinking about peer learning opportunities, technical assistance opportunities, funding and philanthropic support, and capacity building and training for states. And all of those will help make sure we have the right people to do it. And then finally, culture change. So first, the executive order is the start of that culture change. It is the federal government coming out and saying, we value this and we are going to invest in it. It is the recognition that you need a whole person, multi-program, de-siloed approach, the creation of our interagency task force and team to work together. And we have meetings about every month with the senior leaders to bring them in a room and think about how we are delivering for people, not each of our programs alone. It is resetting the state-federal partnership so that we are committed to listening to states, to having forums like this for two-way dialogue, and to co-creating and testing out solutions together. And finally, it is that ecosystem-wide collaboration where we come together and say, we cannot do it all alone. You cannot do it all alone, but let's think together about the roles that each of us can play in delivering the benefits the way that people deserve to have them delivered. So thank you very much. And I look forward to future opportunities to work with all of you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Finally, I'd like to welcome Georgetown's own Dr. Pamela Hurd, Professor of Public Policy at the McCourt School. Professor Hurd's research focuses on inequality and how it intersects with health, aging, and policy. She is the co-author of the book, Administrative Burden, Policymaking by Other Means. Today, she will be sharing about a new tool to measure burden in public programs. Welcome, Pam.
I'm excited to be here. If there's nothing else, I'm always excited to talk about administrative burden. Okay, so what I actually want to talk to you about today, though, is, you've been here kind of talking and really thinking about effective service delivery. And so what I want to talk to you about is a tool that I'm hoping will help us to better evaluate whether or not we're effective at service delivery and whether any kind of improvements we make actually work in practice for the people receiving those benefits and services or trying to access them. So a big part of effective service delivery is whether or not people experience that process as simple, accessible, and respectful. Or do they experience that process as burdensome? Does it feel onerous, complicated, confusing? It sucks my time up. And so that part of the process is really important, trying to understand whether or not people experience the process as burdensome. This is a kind of precise way to measure it. And part of the reason to do this, part of the reason to have a precise definition, is because it's really hard to both identify a problem and provide solutions to a problem if you can't clearly define it, right? So the way that we think about it is in terms of a series of costs. How do we define these kind of onerous experiences? They entail learning costs, the process of figuring out whether or not, for example, you're eligible for a benefit, how to apply for it, that part of it. Compliance costs, which are everything from complicated forms or crashing websites for the folks in this room, to the time costs involved in actually trying to access those benefits and services. And finally, the psychological costs, which are the kind of stress, frustration, anxiety that people can feel as a part of those processes. These categories are useful, both again, in terms of defining what kinds of problems you might have, as well as thinking about appropriate interventions. An intervention that's really good at addressing learning costs may do nothing at reducing compliance costs, for example. This really matters, and this is salient in terms of thinking about administrative burden, in part because the executive branch, and particularly the Biden administration, has made clear that this is a priority through a series of executive orders, agency guidance around the Paperwork Reduction Act, and agency directives. So the goal increasingly for folks delivering federally funded benefits and services is that they have to start thinking about how to reduce administrative burden in the delivery of those benefits and services. And one thing I want to kind of make clear about it is how extensive this is. This effectively will touch nearly anyone living in the US. So if you're a veteran interacting with the VA, if you're trying to get your passport, if you're trying to apply for a green card, if you're over the age of 65 pretty much and receive Social Security benefits. Basically, every individual in the US is probably touched in some way or should be touched by this executive order. So it's big, the magnitude is large. As a part of this, right, and I think we're seeing and hearing a lot of people in this room actually doing this work, we're trying to reduce burdens in these programs and do interventions. And the question is, though, we need to be able to evaluate whether or not they're working. So how do we do that? How do we evaluate that? So with funding from Schmidt Futures and sort of in collaboration with work that we're doing for Code for America, we tried to develop one approach at least to kind of evaluating how effective burden reduction is and the level of kind of administrative burden in public programs. So I'm going to just talk a little bit though about what we were trying to do with this and what priorities were that drove like how we generated this measure. So the first is there's two things we can think about. We can measure outcomes, how much time a process takes, how many forms people have to fill out. Really important, in part because they're kind of relatively objective. And also you don't necessarily have to bother people receiving benefits or trying to access benefits or services to get that information. But people's perceptions matter as well. How they, in fact, experience that process. You may shave off 30 seconds in a process, and that's important, but people may not actually notice, you know, and it's important that we're aware of that so that we understand it's not just like one intervention, but it might be a cumulative process. Like once I've done 6 burden reduction efforts, now people start to really feel it. And that feeling really matters because it affects how we actually perceive whether or not government is helping us, whether or not we should trust government to deliver these services, right? So yes, the objective measures matter, but we also want to understand how people perceive that process. So we wanted to do a kind of perception measure. The second thing is we wanted something that wasn't burdensome, right? We don't want to have people, you know, go through a process and then spend 20 minutes filling out a survey for us, right? Like they will experience that as burdensome and it kind of defeats the point. So you need something short, simple, and something that's easy for people to understand. The final part of this is that we wanted something, there's different ways to talk about this in academia or in economics. You talk about this as a public good. I think in the tech community, you think about this as open source. But basically what we wanted to do also was create a measure that like anyone can use. Anyone in this room, any agency, any nonprofit, like you can just pick it up off the shelf and use it yourself. And a few parts of this, we wanted to do it so that it was like adaptable, a measure that you can alter slightly to fit the particular needs of your program or your organization. But partly what we wanted people to understand is good measures are actually not easy to create. It does require an investment of time, testing, and a process to make sure that you have a measure that actually works pretty well and that people understand. So we wanted to kind of do that work for you. So I'm going to just put the measure up here. But what I want to kind of say about this is that the group that developed this measure here at Georgetown, the Better Government Lab, we do have a working paper that I believe is already accessible via the website for this conference, but I'm happy to share it. We're also happy to chat with folks individually or organizations or groups individually if you want to use the measure, if you want to adapt these measures. We're happy to kind of work with you actually on that to kind of help folks with this process. But the last thing I'll sort of say about this is what we did was we kind of developed like a 1-item version, and then we developed a 3-item version, basically. The 1-item version honestly works pretty much as well as the 3-item version. And the reason why I want to really make this point about short and accessible is precisely because what you'll find, and we know this from, there's a load of empirical evidence to support this. If you ask people a single question, they'll probably answer it for you. You ask them more than that, fewer and fewer people. And the fall off between one question and then after can be really significant. Why does that matter? It matters basically because ultimately, if you ask people a ton of questions, the person who actually does that for you is going to be really different than everyone else that you're trying to serve. So it's great. It is so tempting to like 20 measures. I want to know all these things. It's so tempting. But the reality is like you'll undermine your overall goal, which is to sort of on average understand how people are experiencing the process. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to chat about this. Please feel free to contact me. And we're delighted to have people use this. And so we're happy to chat with you more about it. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank all 3 of our lightning talk speakers. for sharing about their work. We're going to do a quick stage transition and then come back for our final speaker of this morning session. Thanks. All right, thank you so much. I'd like to go ahead and pass the mic back to Ariel Kennan, who will be introducing our final speaker of this morning. Ariel.
Hello again, everybody. Thank you to our amazing lightning talk speakers. I get to work with all of those wonderful humans pretty regularly, and even I learn stuff in their talks. So thank you all again so much. For this next session, we are going to be taking questions again from our in-person audience. So if you still have a note card, if you need a note card, you can also put up your hand and we can get those to you. But I please hope you will have questions for our next guest. And so we'll remind you as we go. Once again, that'll be a hold a card up and pass it to the end to bring it down the aisle. So we are so lucky to have Jennifer Palka joining us. Her new book, Recoding America, was released just yesterday. If you don't believe me that it's a good read, Ezra Klein last week called it the book that every policymaker needs to read. And I can't think of a better endorsement for the book or a reason to read it. If you don't know Jen already, she's the founder of Code for America. She was a deputy CTO in the Obama administration, and she's also the co-founder of US Digital Response. I have been so lucky to call Jen a boss, a mentor, a friend over the last decade or so. And she's also much who I thank for letting me know that I could use my skills in design and product development in the public sector. So please, let's give Jennifer Palka a warm welcome.
Thank you, dear. Oh, excellent. Thank you. What a delight to be here. This is like the best place ever to be the day after you launch a book with people who do all the work that you care about and the work that you are. I happen to be just so in awe of. Thank you for having me. I'm going to talk a little bit about. Let's see, do that. Okay, those are Pam's. Go back. Ah, the other one. Gotcha. Now I know how to use technology. It's good. I'm really great at it. I was recently in the UK where I was talking with a friend who's an economist who kept saying, we starve government by design. It's always by design. We don't give government the resources that it needs. And I think that she's right often, but when she says that, I think about our relationship to design, and I think about all the people who tell me when they see an application form for benefits that isn't easy to use, that somebody has designed that to be hard to use, that it's intentionally user hostile. And I'm not sure that's exactly the correct characterization of our relationship with design in benefits. And so I just want to do a little exploration of that with you and test some ideas about really what it is that we need from design. Are we starving ourselves by design, or what are we really starving ourselves of? So I'm going to start with some work that I did over the pandemic with California when the EDD, the Employment Development Department, ended up with a very large backlog of claims. Every state, as you know, had a backlog of claims because we had somewhere between 10 and 30 times the applications that that we were getting before the pandemic started. And Gavin Newsom, who's our wonderful governor, asked us, me and Yolanda Richardson, to co-chair a strike team to see if we could help get those claims cleared. And This was a incredible learning experience for me, even though I felt like I knew a little bit about how benefit stuff worked. Of course, the thing everybody thought was wrong was COBOL. That's what they all say. There's COBOL in the systems, and that's why this doesn't work. I think we all know that is not a sufficient explanation for why we get backlogs and benefits claims. And of course, it's not even really all that true. There was a mainframe system that was developed in the 80s, but for the decades after that mainframe, we had layered on all sorts of layers of technology, sort of about one a decade. So we really didn't have a COBOL system, and I think this is true probably in all of the states. We had these archaeological layers of technology that had accumulated since we started processing these things electronically. And it had been very hard to go back over time. So Tony Scott calls these the layers of paint. You all know if you paint your windowsill too many times, it starts to crack. And these, of course, had started to crack. But they're also, I think it's important because when you paint a windowsill, you're doing it intentionally. I liked this archaeological layers metaphor because it's just sort of what happened over time. They sort of just accrued, these layers, and it was very hard to go back and figure out how to make them work together. So we had systems, as you all know, that were complex and fragile, and that is a problem. But I learned why that is not really the biggest problem. And I learned that from my friend Marina Nitsa, who was working with the claims processors day after day. And one of them kept saying to her, I'm the new guy. I'm not quite sure how to answer that question. Let me check with the other guys. I'm the new guy. And she finally said, well, how long have you been here? And he said, I've been here 17 years. The folks who really know how this works had been here at least 25 years. Are we really going to be able to just update the technology of a system that is so complex in its policy and processes and regulations? It's much more of a challenge, I think, of policy than it is really of just the technology. And of course, that policy was changing even as we were trying to clear the backlog. Oh, I've gone the wrong way. Sorry, that's what I was doing. So you had, sort of the original law that governs this starting in 1935 with the Social Security Act. I don't know what to put in all those dots there, but many, many changes over time coming from legislative, executive, judicial branches from both federal and state government that make this very complex right up to the current day where the policy governing unemployment insurance was changing because of COVID. And also the clarity about the guidance of that policy was not always happening in exactly when we needed it to do. It was a very complicated situation. This is Commissioner Rob Asaro Angelo of New Jersey, Labor Commissioner, who testified with 7,119 pages of regulations in front of him, because as they were dealing with their backlog, he needed people to understand how this was making this incredibly difficult to do. So to all the folks who tell me that these systems are designed to be hard to use, I say, well, who designed them that way? Who are we supposed to blame? Is it the people who made the technology? Is it the people who made the forms? Or is it the people who, since 1935, have been piling on policy and regulation that make this incredibly difficult? So is this really intentional design, or are we letting things accrete and accrue over time in ways that are not serving us? I want to talk about another example of why I sort of question this idea of intentionally user hostile design. And many of you have seen this before. This goes all the way back to, I think we started talking about it in 2013. This is the application that 23 counties in California used to use for people to apply for SNAP. It had some problems. It took a very long time to fill out. There were over 200 questions. It didn't work on a mobile phone. It was very hard to upload your documents. And while I was working at Code for America, a team, and I think one of the members of the team is here, but I don't see him, Dave Guarino. Okay, there he is. decided that we could do better, or California could do better, and designed Get CalFresh to work on a mobile phone, to have text message follow-up, to allow people to take a picture of the driver's license and upload it as they were creating their application. There's a long story about how this sort of became, in the end, the way that California had people apply for SNAP, and I'll talk about where that's gone in a second. But one of the things that I learned through this was that Dave's colleague, Jake Solomon, was asked to attend a meeting of that consortium of 23 counties who were responsible for building and using this system. And he was asked because he'd been quite critical of it. I guess he and Dave and others had created this teardown of it, where they went through every screen and said, here it's hard for users, here it's hard for users. So you would think he would not be asked to join this meeting of the consortium, but he was asked, in fact, by the vendor. It was HP. And it turns out the vendor really wanted the consortium to make My Benefits CalWin work on a mobile phone. And Jake's critique, and both in his ability to articulate the user experience, why people needed it to work on a mobile phone, was very compelling. And of course, to the credit of these 23 county representatives, they did decide to move this to use some of HP's resources that year to make this work on a mobile phone. But the interesting thing to me was not that they said yes, but how they said yes. And what they did is they all voted. The 23 representatives of the county all got to vote, and I'm very glad that the vote came out right. But what was interesting to Jake as he came out of this meeting is that's not how they made decisions about Get CalFresh. They made it based on user research and watching users. And I think people from the outside don't understand when they see something that feels burdensome, that has 212 questions, they think there's some nameless, faceless bureaucrat behind this who's trying to make it hard for me. And they have too much power. And in fact, 23 county representatives each have very little power. All they're trying to do is to be able to get their needs of their county represented in this process, which makes sense. But who is there saying this is going to be what actually works for the users? And I think we sometimes, and so I talk a lot about this distinction between government needs and user needs, which is language that I borrowed from our friends at the Government Digital Service in the UK. And I think one of the points to take away from this is who in the room is clearly 100% first job representing your user needs. But the other thing is, are we really actively designing this, or are we letting it be designed by committee? And do the people on the outside understand that it is actually not concentrated power that results in a 212 question form, but very diffuse power, where nobody has the power to say, no, we're going to take some of these questions out. That's going to be better for the user. Let's see, where do I have next here? Oh, that's right. I wanted to update because, of course, now California does have a new application that's not Get CalFresh. It's called Benefits Cal. I don't want to assume that just because it has a nice front page that it is well designed all the way throughout. But I think that I hear good things about this application, and we've really come a long way. So credit to the folks in California for taking this in a new direction. I want to talk a little bit about an example that's not so much designed by committee, and forgive me, all the lawyers in the crowd, but designed by lawyers. For my book, I interviewed a team that worked at CMS, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. I guess I don't need to define that acronym for this crowd. I'm just so used to doing it. Who, after the difficulties, shall we say, of healthcare.gov, were handed the job of implementing the next law, the Medicare Access and CHIP Reauthorization Act. And they knew that they couldn't have what happened before. They had to get it right this time. And they knew, because this had to do not with the general public, but with doctors, that doctors were already quite frustrated with them. They didn't like how they were supposed to put in their data about their outcomes, their billing data. They felt like it was sort of a black hole. I heard them say, I'd upload the stuff, I'd hit submit. I had no idea if I'd done it right. If I did it wrong, it was going to deeply affect my practice. And they had to train people to use these systems that were really non-intuitive. And so when MACRA was announced, or when it was passed by Congress, they started to grok the implications of it. Doctors said, oh my God, not only do I hate how I have to do this now, but they're going to change it and I'm going to hate it again. And the only thing worse than what we have now is having to learn a whole new system. And they started to say that they were going to leave Medicare and not take Medicare patients. In fact, there were surveys that showed that many of them were actually planning to do that. So the team at CMS said, we have to make something that's going to make sense to these doctors. And of course, that meant good design and good programming, but I think what that design choices really meant is what I want to get at here. So I'm sorry, yes, the physicians were trying to leave Medicare. They were very, very frustrated. This one says, you know, the only choice I have is to just get out. So one of the first things that the team implementing this had to do was just make a basic website that explained to people, here's what it's going to look like, here's what's in the law, before they put up the new system that doctors would use to file their data. And they found immediately that the first question doctors were going to need to know was, were they part, or they would need to tell Medicare was, are you an individual sole practitioner, or are you part of a group? I said, great, let's put that up. Well, it turns out there are 9 different definitions of a group. So right from the beginning, everyone was going to be really, really confused. And the team that had to do the implementation said to the policymakers, this isn't going to work. We need to get this down to one definition of a group so that doctors aren't going to be so frustrated from the minute they start that they're leaving Medicare. They didn't get it down to 1, they got it to 2, but that's still pretty great. But that took a lot of work, and a lot of people who were supposed to be technologists and in implementation talking with people who were in policy and having a dialogue with them and explaining to them why this was so important. And it's talking to, frankly, a lot of lawyers who said, well, this is technically legally correct. There are 9 different definitions. They didn't make it up. There really was. But there was enough in common with many of those definitions that they could condense it down to 2. This is not where these fights ended. With the next one came up was that some doctors who had very few Medicare patients didn't actually have to participate in the program at all. They didn't have to get new EHR software. They didn't have to retrain their staff because they only had so many and the law exempted them. But the way the folks who were writing the regulations sort of interpreted this was that all doctors would go through the program on the first year. And after the end of the first year, those who fell under the threshold would be exempted. So imagine you're a doctor who you think is, you don't think you're going to end up being and having to be in this program, but you have to train the staff and learn all this new software only then at the end of the year to be able to go back to what you were doing. And so a woman who's a career civil servant at CMS named Yadira Sanchez picked up this fight and convinced ultimately, after many, many conversations with the team writing the regs, to let them exempt them based on the prior year's data. Less technically accurate, but better for users. And once again, she was acting outside of her lane. Is this really design? Or when we just say, we'll have 9 different definitions, when we say let them go through the program, or are we letting lawyers, and we love lawyers, but are we letting lawyers do the job of design? I looked up when I was writing this talk, what's the opposite of design? And lots of different options, but the one that made the most sense is chaos, a lack of planning or organization. And I guess I would ask you all, do you think we have a lack of planning or organization in this field? When you have procurement processes that look like this, you're doing a lot of planning and you have to be incredibly organized. The people I know in this field have organization skills far beyond most people that I know work in the private sector, because you have to be. I don't think that the opposite of this is a lack of planning, certainly amongst this crew. But what we have are, because we have processes that complex, we have enormous lift on project managers. And project management is incredibly important. We should all worship the best project managers. But project management is the art of getting things done. And it stands in its complement is product management. which is the art of deciding what to do in the first place. And if we don't have product management alongside project management, then your project managers are handing way too much and they're trying to do absolutely everything instead of doing what is most important to get to the right outcome and help our users. And I think product management and design are very closely related. Let's see what we have next. So from these stories, I just questioned my friend who kept saying that we are starving government by design. And I know I'm speaking about this at a moment where many states, particularly in unemployment insurance, have just been starved. They had been promised some money for modernization and it has now been taken away. And that happens a lot. And we starve programs like EITC of resources. But we also are putting a lot of money into the administration of many of our programs. And there are times when we are not starving it by design, but we are starving government of design. And design can be the thing that unlocks the use of those resources in the ways that I think that we all intend. It is also sometimes true that we don't value government, so we don't invest in it. But if we don't value design, our investments aren't paying off in the way that they should. And my illustration of that is a story that I will return to the California EDD during the pandemic. I explained to you how we found that you had to be there 17 years to even be sort of a newbie claims processor. Well, there was an impact to that was really shocking. Let me go, oops, sorry. We had these limited number of claims processors during a time when we had at least 10 times the number of claims we'd had in the past. So the governor and the legislature had all agreed that the thing we needed to do was get more people in to help. But what they didn't realize is that if it takes 25 years to become a claims processor, those people could not help with that at all. And what they did do is they took the time of those claims processors and they were slowing them down. And by the time we got their productivity, at a time when we needed their claims processors' productivity to go way up, their productivity had dropped dramatically because they were answering emails from and onboarding and giving system access to 5,000 temps who could not help. Every person the state hired slowed our processing. Now, there were other things that we did as well, but convincing finally the state to reassign those people to things like opening the mail was one of the 3 things that unlocked our ability to clear that backlog. Mike Bloomberg said this recently: the capacity to do something gets conflated with the budget to do something. We had plenty of budget, but we didn't have the capacity. And we didn't have the capacity because of the complexity of the regulations and laws and policy and process that's at the top of it. I'm going to skip that one real quickly. So let me return again now to the team at Medicare that worked on MACRA. And eventually rolled out a program called QPP, the Quality Payment Program. And because they made these choices about the policy and the regulations, not just the choices about the design and the application, like saying we're going to exempt people the first year, they actually rolled out the best program that Medicare had ever seen. Doctors, they braced the call centers for the complaint calls on the first day, and instead doctors called and said, something must be wrong. This is too easy. And they shipped on time and under budget. There's a woman who worked there, Yadira Sanchez, a career public servant, who sort of took what she learned by working on that team. What's the next thing that came her way? Oh, I'm sorry. Have I gone the wrong way? I think I have told her other story. Let me just jump ahead. The next thing that came her way was a pretty small regulation that Congress passed down that asked her to get data about pharmaceutical medications and things out to the ecosystem. And in the regulation, it said very specifically, you will do quarterly data extracts and you will put them out there for the ecosystem to use. And she said, wait a second, if we do that, then it's going to take 9 months for us to package up each of those data extracts. There's going to be tons of staff time on it. people aren't going to get it till it's much later, and they're only ever getting one slice of the data at one particular time. There's a better way to do this. We could write an API that allows anybody to plug in at any time and have real-time access to the data. It's going to cost a little bit more upfront, but it will cost much less over time. All we have to do is maintain the API, and it's going to get the outcome that Congress actually intended. And that's a very bold thing to do, to say, I hear what you told me to do, but I'm going to do this other thing over here because I think that's what you actually wanted. And that kind of boldness and ability to say, I know that's not what I was asked to do, but I think that this is the right thing to do, is something that we don't lift up enough. And I think it's something that gets questioned a lot. But in the end, I see that as a design decision. It's product management saying, wait a minute, let's decide first if this is actually the right thing to do. So I want to end not just with the story of Yadira being quite bold, and I hope Yadira doesn't get any trouble for this after the book comes out. But also just by reminding you that when we do this work, we do it because we're doing it for people. And there's a saying in software that's been around a long time. I didn't make it up. Software is made by and for people. And of course, there's something else that's made by and for people, and that's government is made by and for people. Design is made by and for people. And when we do this work, I want us to remember not only the people that we're trying to do the work for, like having somebody in the room when everyone's voting who's saying, I'm actually representing the user experience here, but also the people here in this community that help us do that. We cannot do this alone. In fact, my one concern about having, I took this photo of Yadira off of her LinkedIn page because I'm afraid to ask her for a photo, because I put her in this book that I've read, that I've written, and she's very nervous about it because she doesn't want to be seen as a hero, because she always deflects towards her team and her community. And she always says, I didn't do this, we did this. And if we want to make decisions as bold as the one Yadira made, we have to do them together, not just in our teams, in our agencies, and in our states, but as a community that supports each other doing them. Oh, sorry, let me go back. So I just wanted to say, to conclude, that I released a book yesterday, and when Ariel said, oh, maybe the timing isn't good for this event because your book will have just come out and you may have things you need to do, I said, there is no better place for me to spend the day that my, well, it's actually the day after that my book comes out, than with the people that I think are my heroes. And this has been an honor to talk to you about it. It's an honor that Ariel has arranged for everyone to get the book. But thank you for letting me be part of your community, even though I'm not somebody who does the work on a day-to-day basis. And thank you for all the work you do. Please support each other through community. That's how we will make the hard design choices that we need to make to get the outcomes that we intend. And I was right on time.
You were perfectly timed.
I never get the timing right. This is great.
Does anyone have any questions for our friend Jen? Can I see any cards go up?
We could pass any other cards to the end and then we'll clap them and bring it down. Kevin was in the front seat, so he's able to.
Hi, Kevin.
Well done.
All right, Jen, how can we build a coalition of leaders working to transform the culture of our government institutions?
Just do it.
You're presenting a position that's in the minority of a lot of leaders that are out there. So yeah, how do we take what you're doing and amplify it and try to get this to more people that are in those product manager roles or could be in those product manager roles or in leading organizations?
I mean, I think one of the reasons I wrote the book is that I feel like everybody I know in this field is sort of fighting that over and over again, fighting the sense that we are in the minority, that we have so many other people that we have to convince. And I think we need more people around this community willing to fight a little bit like up the chain on your behalf. So telling stories, I like telling stories, I like writing, I like talking, and I'm happy to do that in hopefully in ways that change the environment, that allow you to create these coalitions of leaders. But ultimately, I think it comes back to who are the leaders in this room and in other rooms? How are you connecting? How are you sharing your stories? And how are you supporting each other? And then what stories do you have that you can feed people like me and the press? One thing I really want elected leaders to take away from the book is that they spend all of their time on failure. And there's a quote, I think it's Deepak Chopra says, what we pay attention to grows. If they spent half of the time they spend calling people up in front of hearings and yelling at them as they did with the leader at the EDD while I was there, and spent that instead saying, these folks are doing this right. Yadira is doing this right. You've got it right. You've got it right. What does that right look like? And how do we lift those stories up so that you can connect with each other? I think we would have far better outcomes. I'm just trying to acknowledge, I know that isn't necessarily in the power of everybody in this room, but we need to always be asking for our allies outside to help get that message through to the people who can change the environment in which we work.
Well, we have an additional question. I agree that it makes sense to do the right thing rather than follow the precise but unhelpful letter of the law.
But
I worry about when harmful or misguided things can be done under that banner. Do you have thoughts about how to square that circle?
Yes. Whose question is this? Yeah, I think it's a really good question. It's really important to acknowledge. I think we will always be in tension between an agile government and a stable government. And that there is no solution to that. As they say, this is not a solution it's not a problem to be solved. It's a situation to manage, right? And it's absolutely true that if we go too far to the other side and say, oh, you can ignore the law, just do whatever you want, we don't have a democracy anymore. And there have been threats to that in many ways that brought that to life and made more scary, I think, in the past couple of years. On the other hand, it is a balance, and we need to ask ourselves where we are in that balance. I don't know if anybody here does yoga, but like tree pose, it's not because you are simply balanced. It is that you are constantly falling out of balance and falling back into it. That's how they say you stay up. I'm actually pretty good at tree pose. I'm terrible at the rest of yoga.
You're making me nervous in those shoes.
I know, I make myself nervous. But we have gone, I think, in some ways too far towards follow the exact letter of the law. There's a fantastic law article by Nick Bagley called The Procedure Fetish, which speaks to why do we create procedure after procedure after procedure that stop letting us get the outcome that we need. And he has a couple of reasons, but the one that stuck with me is we have anxiety about legitimacy. We're afraid that if we don't have that procedure to say, I know I did it right because I followed this procedure, that somehow we aren't legitimate. We haven't made the right choice. And that's a mind frame that I think does need to shift over. Do we risk creating a situation where there is disrespect for the law and civil servants who do things that are not what we decided to do democratically? Yeah, and that's always going to be a risk. But when we create a government that is so burdensome that people are incredibly frustrated, then you get disengagement from government, people who experience burdensome means-tested benefits vote at lower rates. You get people who just say, this doesn't work, blow it all up. I don't care anymore. I want to always both empathize with that feeling of want to blow it all up and remind ourselves there are better choices. Is that it?
I think we have time for another couple questions. So I have one in my hand, but if there are others in the audience, okay, I see one. Hold it up high and a runner will come and grab it from you. This is a question specific about the EDT work in California. How did the EDT team identify the people who used the UI system in order to provide feedback in a UX context? How do you identify people for feedback or user research?
Oh, that's a great question. It turns out there were actually a couple of teams already at the EDD that were doing user research. They just they weren't connected to the people who were trying to solve the problem. And I think you can probably ask Dave about this later because he was there as well. There were a lot of feedback about the user experience was coming in primarily in the seat where I sat from state legislators whose offices were overwhelmed with phone calls. There was a extensive Facebook group that had, extensive is not even the word for it, of people helping each other get through this process. The truth is, in terms of like finding the right users to do the research with, I don't know how they were doing it, but I do know that they had a team already doing that again, great civil servants, the right practices, the right intentions, not connected to the people who are making the decisions. And just getting those dots connected, I think has helped a lot.
Well, that last call got some good ones. So I think
do we have time?
I think we're going to do them. We're going to go,
Okay,
we're going to go fast. Okay. Love how you point out how design by committee can lead to a clunky user experience. What are your suggestions for rallying diverse stakeholders around a vision that will actually help users?
There's no silver bullet. I think constantly returning to the goal and remembering that because you've said it once or you've gotten initial buy-in on it, you do not have final buy-in on it. Remembering that it's a muscle that you build, not a thing you do. Coming back again to finding a way to center the experience of the user for folks who are not going to spend every day doing that. That's just not their jobs, but bringing it back and bringing it back. I will say it's a great question. And I think a lot of the people in the audience will have better tactical suggestions than I will. So why don't we have that be part of the lunch talk? Ask your colleague you're sitting next to how they do it, because it's hard.
I love it. Well, we're going to combine the last two questions because they're actually related to each other. So can you please share some wisdom on storytelling in government for this work? Do you have any fails, learns, or experiences? And the other question is around creating an elevator pitch for your top executive level, like a governor or mayor, around this work.
I'll start with the second one. I have an op-ed in the Washington Post today, actually, about this, which is, I think the key thing that a governor misunderstands right now is they'll say to me, "You're right, this is all bad because we didn't invest in technology." And I'll say, "No, you didn't invest in tech teams. You didn't invest in delivery teams. You didn't invest in design teams. You invest in people first and technology second." And I feel like that's the kind of thing that I can say 20 times before it gets through. But let's just say it 20 times because maybe they'll get it on the 21st. But that op-ed is actually focused on do we have anybody from New Jersey's Department of Labor? You guys do some good work. Oh, is that Jillian? You know you're in it, right? Okay. There are many things that New Jersey is doing right in unemployment insurance, and an op-ed only gives you 800 words. So the thing that I pulled out are leadership and investment in people. And I think that gets back to what I was talking about earlier. Many of you in UI may have just lost funding that you thought you were going to get. That is not okay. I'm not condoning that. And I don't want to celebrate it, but I do want everyone to go look at models like New Jersey, where they're going to be able to keep making progress and making the experience for claimants in New Jersey a little bit better every day, every week, every month, because they've got teams with the right mandate working on it. I know we don't all have that. And that's what we need to tell the people above. That's what you need to do. Thank you very much for the $1 billion that you are going to, spend on something, but are we spending that well? And I don't know if there's anyone from California UI here. I live in California, so I watch this stuff. There's other RFPs that I think they're out on the street now that total $1.1 billion for, and this is state money, it's not feds. So the cuts, I don't think help them. I appreciate that because I understand that we neglect these systems and downturns. And it's a way of saying, hey, we're not just going to now that the crisis is over, we're not just going to let it go. But I worry that 1.1 billion is spending money on tech before it's getting the internal competencies and capacities and authorities right. And so I am eager to have people understand why New Jersey is doing such great work. But in the end, it is great leadership. Thank you, Jillian. I think I only answered one of them. What was the other one?
Do you want to take on the why? This is an elevator
storytelling
pitch around procurement. Or the storytelling. I think you kind of covered them.
Okay. An elevator pitch. Oh, on procurement. Yeah. I will just be honest. I don't know what the solutions are for procurement. Everyone always says, what would you do if you had a magic wand on procurement? And I just say, I don't know. So I tend to focus, if I have a magic wand, on can you hire people? Can you hire people in less than 9 months? Do you have the people you need? Let's go back to people. That is a fundamental core thing that drives civil service, drives a healthy bureaucracy that can deliver on the intentions of our policies and laws. So I'm just going to keep going back to that. Not that there's not a lot to say about procurement, but I think we should fix hiring first.
All right, Jen, thank you so much
Thank you
for sharing so generously with us today. I hope you can all give Jen a warm round of applause.
Thank you all for the work you do.
Thanks, Jen. We can give her one more round of applause because she's amazing. Thank you, Jen. Awesome. Wow, that was an amazing way to kick off the day. And I did not lie to you earlier when I said it was going to be some pretty cool talks. We've heard from our BEC and DBN leadership today. We had a great panel featuring Jordan Burris, Rachel Carson, Elizabeth Laird, and Amy Ashita. And then we had 3 fascinating lightning talks by Jeremiah Garcia Ramadan, Sarah I can never say her last name right, Estes, and Pamela Hurd. And we just had a wonderful presentation by Jennifer Palka. And shameless plug, if you haven't gotten your copy of Recode in America, and for our live stream audience, make sure you purchase a copy so we can support the work that she's doing. I want to say thank you to our online audience for being here with us today. And for our in-person audience, we will be moving upstairs to the 4th floor of Fisher for lunch in a few moments. So get excited for after lunch. We have our Learn Something, Build Something sessions in the afternoon, facilitated by a lot of the peers here in this room with us today. And a reminder for folks, y'all can pick your own sessions in the afternoon. So even if you go to digital identity for Learn Something, you can go to procurement in the afternoon, second session. So just know that you can mix and match and kind of choose your own adventure for those, but you can also stay in the same track if you like. So with that, let's head up to lunch in Fisher, and I'll see you all upstairs. Thanks, y'all. I wasn't supposed to have that.